Good afternoon. Welcome everybody and thank you for joining us on our weekly virtual webinar today. Today we're going to be talking about now that we've transformed to virtual learning and work, what comes next and what do we need to be prepared for. My name is Mandy. I am a digital media manager here with Studer Education, and today I will be your Slido facilitator. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our host, Dr. Janet Pilcher.
Thank you, Mandy. Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you this afternoon. If it's afternoon for you, wherever you are, we're in beautiful Pensacola. So it's just a nice spring day here. So hope that wherever you are, you're having a nice day as well. I'm Janet Pilcher. I lead Studer Education and spent most of my life, and I've spent all of my life in education, some of that in K-12 as a math teacher at one time, and then about 20 years in higher education as a dean of a college where we had teacher preparation programs and leadership programs. So it's great to be here today. I want to take a few minutes today to really get us to reflect and think about where we are right now. Gosh, I know there's so many things that you've been doing over the past 4 or 5 weeks to transition to a whole new place. So I just want us to take a breath, take some deep breaths and really think about what we've done and then what's ahead of us and really begin to put our minds in that place. But before I do that, I'd like to thank you all. I know there are a number of educators, teachers, and leaders, and school board members and executive leaders on the call today. And I just want to take a few minutes and thank you. Thank you for what you've done to make great transitions to help students and their families over the past month. It's been a tremendous effort on your part, and I continue to hear great things about the work of teachers and leaders in our schools, in our universities, and in our educational institutions as I continue to work with our partners throughout the country. So I just want to take a minute and with our gratitude to express our gratitude toward you and appreciate you. Thank you. So today before I do that, I kind of just a quick funny story. So a lot of my friends and some of our colleagues, are now teachers, right? Their parents teaching their kids, and so we offer a teacher preparation program. Some of you, I think, on the call or have been in that program or connected to it, called Teacher Ready, and it's an alternative teacher preparation program. And so some of my friends and colleagues know that we do this that aren't in education, and so they've sent me a note or asked me, hey, do you have a Teacher Ready for parents, like a parent version of Teacher Ready? Because we're really struggling teaching. So great testament to the value of our profession. So today we're going to really talk about what do we think about, what do we think about and need to do now? Where are we now as we prepare for the new school year, as we move into August? How courageous are we based on what we've been through to make bold decisions that will improve our organizations? And then we'll end today with some questions and answers. So as we always do on these webinars, we're going to start with a poll. So Mandy, if you'll help us with our first poll, be great to see where people are. So the first question is, how well is your educational institution, prepared for 3 potential scenarios? So when we think about August, our first instinct is we want to go right back to where we've been. But what if we're not there? We could go back. So how well prepared are we to go back? How well prepared are we if we have to go into 100% virtual, stay in that way? And how prepared are we to do some type of blended, maybe back and virtual, or some type of alternative procedure? So let's let the results roll in, Mandy. All right, so okay, so we're looking kind of on a scale of 1 to 10, score about a 5.3, so kind of midway through, a little 6, going back to brick and mortar. How well prepared are we? About 5.6 brick and mortar. So let's flip to the next one, kind of see where we are there. Back to 100% virtual. A little bit, about 6.5, so kind of a little bit more than the middle there. Let's flip to the last one. What if we had to go blended? okay, kind of a bit of it lower. You know, what if we have to do some of this blended stuff and figure it out? You know, not sure that we're have thought about it enough to be that paired in some hybrid mode. So so really good feedback. That's really helpful to me because I've continued to ask that question when we work with leaders is, you know, how, when we think about August, sometimes we've tended to think about, we just want to go back to the way it was, you know, and our thinking, I think in life is we're just going to go back. And I think the longer we go, the reality is setting in that's probably not going to be back to that. So we've got some work ahead of us. So let's talk about that. And as we move to the next slide, let's just talk a little bit more about where we are. So as you all think about what you need to consider to prepare for the possible situations, I don't know about you, but it's mainly focused on two areas. One is the area of learning, and I'm going to spend all the time next week, next Tuesday on the webinar, just on learning. And it's also become almost as, and just as important as really to focus on safety and well-being. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time today just talking more about organizationally, what do we have to think about that's different than learning, still supports learning, but what are those things we have to think about as we move into next year? So when we think about learning, see if these things resonate with you. You know, when we go back in August, some students are going to be on track. As we know, others are going to be way behind. We'll probably have little assessment data to know where our students are on grade level. We just won't have those same assessments that we've had in the past, or it'll be different. So we're going to have to figure that out. We could have staggered school days, smaller class sizes, just a whole different configuration. And what we talked about in the poll too is we could have all virtual or blended. So in learning, we'll talk more about that next week in terms of the learning aspect itself. You know, how do we make sure we still capture the best opportunities for student success? Let's go on the other side of the chart. We're looking at safety and well-being. You know, safety now, yeah, you know, this is really resonating with me. Safety now is as important as learning. When I'm talking to presidents of universities or superintendents, you know, I'm thinking if I'm in the shoes of that leader, you know, one of the worst things that could happen is if a student, you know, really gets sick and is in a bad way or provides harm to family. You know, that's just almost a never event for us as we go into next year. And that's a heavy, heavy responsibility. You know, so what are we going to have to do to ensure that we have that safe of an environment? So it probably gets to things like deep cleaning in ways that we've never understood that to be with a new standard. You know, what does this really look like to keep our schools and our students safe? The other side of that is we're going to really be focusing on well-being of families, you know, our students and employees. Our families have experienced different and real circumstances, and they're going to need more support than ever. Some of our families are going to come from businesses that just don't exist anymore. Some of our families are going to, so our students are going to come from families who have been in healthcare and, you know, just gone through the emotional trauma themselves of what we're going through right now. And so our world as a teacher and as leaders and as educators becomes much larger than what we've understood it to be. So I'm asking us today not to really solve for that, but to at least begin to think about things that we need to consider so that we can solve for that, so that we're prepared in August. So as we move to the next slide, you know, so what can you do? You know, I mean, what can you take away from here? One of the things that we're beginning to do with organizations is to apply a transitional improvements assessment, which helps organizations know exactly where they are. But as we go to the next slide, if you don't have that full assessment, here are 3 questions I'd just recommend that you ask yourself or that you get with your colleagues and you begin to talk about these. First of all, as we've experienced life in schools and universities and educational institutions and organizations in the last 4 or 5 weeks, where have we been successful? And the important part of this question is, how do we know? What data can we rely on to where we know we've been successful? How do we know? And the second question we can talk about is what have we learned that we want to keep doing regardless of the work situation. That's what I've heard time and time again from individuals who are in the work environment is, man, there are things that we're doing that I hope we never stop doing because they're making us better. What are those things? What do we want to continue to do? And then the last question that you can talk to your colleagues about and really put deep reflection to is, when you enter your work in schools in August, what do you anticipate work will be? It's not going to be what we've known life to be. It will be different, but what is it going to be for you, and how do we make sure that we're providing the best learning environment and the best opportunity for students to be safe and their families to have our care and concern about their well-being? So as we move to the next slide, I want you to answer this question. It's a little bit of a jump, but you'll see why the jump is there. So just take a few minutes and just answer this about yourself. How courageous are you? So take a few minutes, just in general. How courageous are you? Okay, so we have some pretty courageous people on the phone today. 8.2. So that's a good sign. That's probably why you're on this webinar, because of you're courageous. But if you're not, I find myself, I like to sometimes think I'm courageous. And then when it comes, when a difficult decision comes in front of me, I really probably have to reflect on how courageous I really am. But thank you for taking the time to really reflect on that. So let's talk about that what courageous means in regard to decision making, because when we begin to think about what August is going to look like, we're going to really have to look at things like resistance to change. So if you think about, we're all constantly trying to figure out how we help people move toward change, to change. And so as you think about these three statements, where would you rate yourself on what you prefer, and what about our students? So just think about this. So we think about where would we rate ourselves and our students on what they prefer, complacency versus urgency, being comfortable versus being uncomfortable, having no tension versus what we call creative tension. And so what I'd like to, if for those of you who have read Peter Senge's work, what Peter Senge tells us about learning and about ourselves is that when we're comfortable, we don't really learn in that comfortable space. We learn when we stretch ourselves to a place that's uncomfortable for us. But we also don't want to stretch it too much, because if we stretch it too much, we create too much tension, where we create such discomfort that people cannot learn. They become too anxious for the learning. So it's like that rubber band. What's the right level or right pressure that we put on that rubber band to stretch, to build the right creative tension for our students to learn and for ourselves to manage through that change? So when we think about being courageous, that courageousness is really about how do we manage through that resistance of change. So as we go to the next slide and we look at what courage means in this particular place and time. Courage, I took this from a podcast that I did two podcasts about courage, and I took this statement from one of those podcasts because I think it's relevant in this day and time. Courage is the application of power to break through the short-term challenges in order to achieve our long-term goals. So we've got short-term challenges, but what are we going to do to determine what our long-term goals are, and how are we going to overcome those short-term challenges? So, I think about people who have courage. You rated yourselves a few minutes ago, and I've rated myself. So what do people who have courage do? They take risks that go against the grain. They make decisions that really build revolutionary change. And they don't shirk at bold actions because they fear resistance. So if you're a teacher, a school board member, in an educational institution as a leader, where are you really on being that courageous so that you're working through the short-term challenges to get long-term gain? So let's go to the next, as we go to the next slide, these are the questions I think we begin to ask ourselves. What are the obstacles? So if you think of where you are right now, we've wanted to build some change into our organizations for a long time. And we've thought about, on the second question, that because of the pushback, it would just be too difficult. And my goodness, look at the changes that we've accomplished in the past 4 to 5 weeks in ways that are unbelievable. We would have never been able to push some of the changes without the crisis at hand. But with that crisis, we found that people could come together and push through that change. So what do we have to do to be courageous, to continue to push through those boundaries so that we can become better than we've ever become? Do we have the courage to choose long-term gain over short-term obstacles? You know, I go back to my life as a leader, and I think that sometimes, as I mentioned, I've been courageous, but I know that when resistance has been so strong, I've had a tendency to kind of waffle on being courageous. It's our time, and all of you, what I ask all of you, I hope all of you here, regardless of what position you're in, let's really think about how we can build a better system for students, because we have that opportunity to do that. And so as we move to the final slide, there are 3 things I hope that you take away from you in terms of how we think about how we have an equal and deeper responsibility to the work that we do. We've always had a commitment to learning. What are the measures that matter? And what specifically do we do and need to do to ensure that all of our students are learning to their greatest potential? That's been our life. We've been committed to that. That's no different. How do we do it better? The 2 that are going to be equally important and build change into our system, I just challenge you to think about, how do we take that same level of priority and place it on student safety? What do we have to do in our operations area, in our academic area, in our schools, with our teachers, with our families, to ensure that all of our students walk into our classrooms in August, and that we have their life in our hands and they're safe and we're safe? What do we need to do to really ensure that our teachers, our faculty, our staff are safe? What do we as leaders in this particular point have the obligation to do to ensure that? What is that going to take, and what do we work on tomorrow to begin to put in place the things we need to do to ensure that occurs when people walk into our buildings in August, or whenever we get an opportunity to see each other again? And finally, I hope that we equally place a priority on families' well-beings. We see the stories that are coming at us from the many different people who are experiencing life in such significant ways that are different from what they've known life to be. You are doing that. You're doing that each and every day, and our lives are different. How do we take care of each other? How do we take care of our students? How do we take care of our families? And how do we take care of the people who come to work with us each day? I hope we place equal importance on all 3 of these. And if we do, I think it'll change and revolutionize the way we do our work each and every day. I appreciate you. I appreciate the time that you've spent with us this afternoon. And I hope that as you go away today, I know I haven't given you any answers because I wish I had them. I don't have them to give, but I know that we can work collectively in partnership together to find the right answers, to do things in ways we've never done them before. Thank you all very much for the time today, and I'm going to spend the last few minutes, 10 minutes or so, answering some questions. Okay, so let me take a couple here. So how do we lead others when we aren't sure what next fall will look like? Gosh, you know, so I use the word assertions all the time. This is such a great question. And I think one of the first things to do, if you're in a leadership position, is to sit down with a group of people and make assertions. We talked about 3 different three different possibilities. One is we're back to brick and mortar, and we're back to the way that we enter the world, and what does that mean for us? The second, you know, that we had the three. So those are our assertions. So as a leader now, it's our opportunity to engage in a dialogue with those people we rely on the most, and to bring other people in who can provide guidance on that, to really begin to think about what do we need to do in order to accomplish the things that we need to in order to enter, even if we don't know what it is. So if this, then what? If this, then what? If this, then what? There's no one way of answering that question. It's probably a number of if-then statements that's well worth our time in terms of dialogue. What can I do to drive the right urgency? Here's the best news of all in the answer to this question. We have urgency. So I usually I answer this question at conferences is, how do we get people to have that sense of urgency? Because of the situation, the opportunity that's in front of us is the urgency is here. And just by helping people understand what's in front of us and creating that common conversation around that, we don't have to create urgency because the situation is urgent in and of itself. We just have to be, we as leaders have to know how to build the right conversations around urgency to build the motivation in our workforce to help with that. How do I know if my team is ready to turn their attention to this forward-focused planning? You know, you don't know. I think this might be a hard answer, but I don't think we have a choice. Whether we're ready or not, it's here. And so as a leader, this is not, if you want to do it, you can. This is, we have to do this, and we have to do this for our own well-being as well as for the well-being that we serve. That's in front of us right now. This is a have to in regard to where we're going. I feel the adults are having a more difficult time adjusting than the students. Aren't we all? You know, how can we help others work through change? Too much change at one time. Yeah, I think, you know, this is the well-being part. I talked a little bit about well-being of families. There's probably one segment that we can do, and maybe it's a way that we come back to a webinar just on this. We also have to take care of the well-being of the people who come to work with us every day, because the stressors on them are significant. And so I think we're going to have to help them manage through that. So that's a topic in and of itself. I'm going to ask somebody on my team to take a note, because we should address that with a more detailed answer. There's some podcasts too, Casey, I know you're on, that you could build in resources here to help answer. How do we manage our courage with the communities resistant to courageous leadership? Yeah, this is such a great question. You know, I really feel like, and you may not agree with me, whoever asked that, I feel like now's the time. So our communities are connected to us in ways that they've never been connected to us before. And there are things that we can do because of what's in front of us. So when there's an opportunity, because change is here, then that resistance may still be there, but our rationale for change takes on a different conversation in a different dimension. So that's our job as a leader, is to figure out, what have we always wanted to do that we've had that community resistance that maybe we could do now? And then how do we message that in a way to help people understand, because of what we're going through, the significance of change becomes even more important. So that would be kind of what we call keywords or key messaging, in ways that help people understand that and really try to move our community to that. And I'm going to go back to courage. This is where I would ask us to really assess our courage, because even if our community is resistant to change, maybe it's time as leaders that we have to push through that resistance regardless of the level of resistance they have, because it's just simply the right thing to do, to help our teachers, to help our students, and to help our families in the long run. It really goes back to our values and how we exhibit courage in relation to our values. As a teacher, how can I prepare my students for the uncertainty of next year? Gosh, you know what? I'm going to take this question, and Casey, and if you'll write this down for next week, I don't mean, and we'll provide some resources here as well, but I'd like to take this question into next week's webinar, as we really talk more about learning and teaching and really focusing on what teachers can do with students, because I think that's a really significant question. And it builds within the well-being aspect of what we're doing. And then the question, health and safety are huge. How do we assure our employees, students, community that our organization can provide a safe and healthy environment? Yeah, I've asked this question. I work with higher education institutions and K-12 and other organizations. And as I've worked with higher ed institutions, I think, and we've talked about them, their students coming on campus and living on campus, I've asked them, what are you doing? How are you changing your cleaning procedures, for example? And so we've got a couple of focus groups out for people in the K-12 and in higher ed who are individual leaders in that area of facilities, and we're asking them that question. So our standards for cleaning, for example, have to go up. So for example, if a hospital is at level 4 or level 1, let's say level 1, and let's say in schools we're at level 4, I'm just making this up by the way for a minute, but level 4, we may have to move move from level 4 to level 2. And so our whole idea of the way that we keep schools clean and safe and the procedures that we provide for students when they're coming in are going to change. It's work we've never done before, and it's probably work we're going to have to do. So teaching Qatar, a small country in the Middle East, and we're going through all the same issues our colleagues back home are going through. Connections. Gosh, what's so significant about this is a global issue, and it's a way that we can come together. No matter where we live in the world, you're exactly right. We can come together and really solve the problems, because the problems have to be solved in the same way. I hope you just connect with some of our resources and ways that we can connect back with you and continue those connections with our network. Thanks for being here today. And last one, how do we help our leaders assess their courage? I think as we close today, I've got 2 podcasts on courage. I spent a lot of time. Courage has always been, I wouldn't say a challenge. I'm a compromiser as a leader at heart. And so working through and pushing the boundaries to have courage has always been, I wouldn't say an obstacle, but something that I've tried to do that's been difficult for me for some time. So I did 2 podcasts on courage, probably more to help myself, but really looking at some respectable leaders across the country who have great courage. Maybe listening to those 2, Casey will send those, and listening to those with your leaders, and at first just building a conversation around that might be a helpful piece. And I'd love a connect back if you do that, just to see what you learn and see how we can be helpful. Thank you all for being with us today. I know that we have some resources that we'll connect you to. We want to learn together. We build opportunities to build this 30-minute connection for us to challenge our thinking, to build out a different way of thinking, and to maybe have an action or 2 that you can take with you. You are, again, I appreciate you, appreciate what you've done, and I really look forward to the opportunities we have ahead of us, and for ways that we can collectively work together as a profession to be the best that we can be. Thank you all very much. Have a great rest of the week, and hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody.